Discussing the internationale, but perhaps later. I'm Michael Kazin, co-editor of Dissent, and thanks very much for coming this afternoon on a beautiful day. I hear some people came from the immigrant rights demonstration, is that correct? How many folks came from that? Great. Theory and practice joined us. What we're going to do is we have three distinguished speakers, and I'll be a not-so-distinguished commentator of sorts. This topic for today is the past, present, and future of socialism and social democracy. Maybe I'll just introduce all the speakers very quickly to start. And then each of them will speak for 15 minutes or so, and then we should have plenty of time for questions, and comments, debate, disagreement, and so forth. So, first is Robin Blackburn, to my right here, not necessarily politically. Robin's been teaching at the New School for how long?
10 years.
10 years, yeah. Originally in Britain, stalwart of New Left Review in the past, authored many, many books on slavery and other topics. What's your latest book?
Age Shock, about pension.
Yeah, Age Shock, pensions. You know, a wonderful writer who I'm sure is well known to all of you. Next will be Sherry Berman. Sherry teaches political science at Columbia. I think of her as an historian as much as a political scientist, but she's written wonderful books about social democracy. The Primacy of Politics is one that I use in my classes on the history of socialism, a very popular book among my students anyway. And she's a member of the editorial board of Dissent. And then Michael Walzer, co-editor of Dissent, author of course many books on politics, political theory, other topics. Rob?
Well, thanks very much for inviting me to come along to this. What I want to do is look at the future first, and then to go back to the past. And what I want to do is look at economics first, and then look at values. I do think economics is essential in a pure value approach to socialism. You know, vital and important as it is, I think we're living through critical times where there has to be something tangible that we're saying to the moment. And here, sort of somewhat schematically, is what I might have to say. In the weeks and months after September 2008, capitalism as we know it was saved from a near-death experience by massive state intervention, which left the US federal authorities with major assets, including a huge stake in Citigroup, the country's largest bank, in AIG, the largest insurer, in GM, the world's largest automobile concern. And Fannie Mae, the mortgage giant, was once more fully in public hands. The visible bailout was huge, but was greatly exceeded by the invisible bailout, whereby banks could borrow money from the Fed's discount window at only 0.5%, while lending out that same money at 4% or 8% or even 16%. There was also a stimulus package, too much of it in the form of tax cuts, and too little in the form of investment in infrastructure and new manufacturing. The rescue package staved off the crisis, and nearly all the investments have paid off, so that the US Treasury and Fed have actually made a profit from the bailout. Unfortunately, the inadequacy and inappropriateness of the stimulus means that unemployment is still over 9% and the recovery weak. And what I've said about the US applies even more so to the UK, whose situation is even weaker. A weak recovery will mean that weak revenues to cover ballooning deficits at both state and federal level. The misery caused by weak revenues will lead to state authorities to impose the sort of reckless cutbacks already seen in California, New Jersey, and several other states. Popular anger will be seen on the streets and at the ballot box, I suspect. The countries of the European Union face an even stiffer fiscal crisis, one which could break apart the Eurozone. Trying to cure the problem via austerity rather than recovery may help to save capitalism, but will provoke uproar, as already seen in Greece. In this critical situation, saving capitalism will best be met by further drastic installments of state intervention. These can take two forms. Firstly, and most probably, the neoliberal path of state authorities stepping in and using their fiscal powers to guarantee business and profits in the private sector. In Europe, the problem is even tougher because the EU has very slender revenue resources. The total income to the European Union is only 1% of European GDP, so it's fiscally very, very slight, which is why it can't deal with proper bailouts. In both the US and the UK, the large banks and financial houses show no sign of stepping up investment in the real economy sufficient to ensure a strong recovery, so further bouts of state intervention will be needed to avoid continuing, indeed worsening pain. The alternative is to construct a public utility finance system and mount a new and more ambitious stimulus package. Weak recovery will be bad for many, but especially so for public sector workers, since it's their jobs and benefits that will be cut first. The public sector unions in the UK as well as in the US, they're definitely first in the firing line, and they know it very well. And a bonfire of benefits, that's one of the solutions proposed. What both the EU and the US need is new sources of tax revenue and new institutions for channeling and managing public investment, something akin to the US resolution finance trust of the 30s and 40s, capable of making huge productive investments in return for commensurate equity holdings, combined with a determined move to a public utility finance system, crucially embracing public ownership of the large banks. Public ownership stakes should not all be retained in the hands of federal authorities, but should rather be distributed to trust funds in each state according to its population. The regional network of the Federal Reserve could also play a role in the US, while in Europe, the EU authorities need new taxing powers with large funds earmarked for the European Development Bank. Proposals for a banking levy are already floating around. This needs to be set at stiff and serious rates. A programme of adequate scale would obviously involve major investment in clean energy, transport infrastructure, education, research, innovation, healthcare facilities. Ensuring sufficient funds will require resort to new sources of tax revenue, and I did write about this a couple of years back in Dissent. Therefore, the most appropriate taxes would be those on capital, not on earned income. Amongst them would be a share levy through which every corporation employing more than 100 people or with a turnover of over $100 million would issue new shares equivalent to 10% of their annual profits to a network of state-level trust funds. In my book, Age Shock, I supply a detailed account of what such a levy would raise and how the resulting funds could be managed by the regional network in order to make them accountable and effective. In parenthesis, it's also worth pointing out that states which accumulated future funds or sovereign funds prior to this recent crisis, countries like Australia and Norway, have generally found it much easier to navigate the crisis. So we have a critical significance from publicly controlled sort of surplus funds. I have so far avoided using the word socialism to describe the measures a strong recovery would require, but we can be sure that commentators who already denounce the timid palliatives taken by Washington and London as socialism would find the measures proposed, that I've just proposed, to be rampant Bolshevism. They'd be far from the mark, of course, as I'm not at all prescribing a Soviet-style command economy. There would still be robust markets in many commodities, albeit combined with decommodification of education, healthcare, and most financial services. In my view, there should be a global drive against poverty, led by a universal old age pension and youth grant of $1 a day, and I published an article in New Left Review in 2008 where I spelt out how that might work.